Chapter 40 of the Deluge, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by K. Hand. The Deluge, Volume 1, by Henryk Sienkiewicz. Translated by Jeremiah Curtin. Chapter 40. Next morning a wonderful and unusual movement reigned in the cloister. The gate was open, and entrance was not refused to the pious. Services were celebrated in the usual course, but after services all strangers were directed to leave the circuit of the cloister. Kordetsky himself, in company with Zamoyski and Pan Pyotr, examined carefully the embrasures and the escarpments supporting the walls from the inside and outside. Directions were given for repairing places here and there. Blacksmiths in the town received orders to make hooks and spears, scythes fixed on long handles, clubs and heavy sticks of wood filled with strong spikes. And since it was known that they had already a considerable supply of such implements in the cloister, people in the town began at once to say that the cloister expected a sudden attack. New orders in quick succession seemed to confirm these reports. Toward night 200 men were working at the side of the walls. 12 heavy guns sent at the time of the siege of Cracow by Pan Varshytsky, Castellan of Cracow, were placed on new carriages and properly planted. From the cloister storehouses monks and attendants brought out balls, which were placed in piles near the guns. Carts with powder were rolled out. Bundles of muskets were untied and distributed to the garrison. On the towers and bastions watchmen were posted to look carefully, night and day, on the region about. Men were sent also to make investigation through the neighborhood. To Bjanstyny, Klobuchek, Kjepitsi, Krushin, and Mostov. To the cloister storehouses, which were already well filled, came supplies from the town, from Chenstohovka, and other villages belonging to the cloister. The report went like thunder through the whole neighborhood. Townspeople and peasants began to assemble and take counsel. Many were unwilling to believe that an enemy would dare to attack Yasna Gora. It was said that only Chenstohova itself was to be occupied. But even that excited the minds of men, especially when some of them remembered that the Swedes were heretics, whom nothing restrained, and who were ready to offer a purposed affront to the Most Holy Lady. Therefore men hesitated, doubted, and believed in turn. Some wrung their hands, waiting for terrible signs on earth and in heaven, visible signs of God's anger. Others were sunk in helpless and dumb despair, and anger more than human seized a third party, whose heads were filled as it were with flame. And when once the fancy of men had spread its wings for flight, straightway there was a whirl of news, ever changing, ever more feverish, ever more monstrous. And as when a man thrusts a stick or throws fire into an ant-hill, unquiet swarms rush forth at once, assemble, separate, reassemble. So was the town, so were the neighboring hamlets, in an uproar. In the afternoon, crowds of townspeople and peasants, with women and children, surrounded the walls of the cloister, and held them as it were in siege, weeping and groaning. At sunset, Kordetsky went out to them, and pushing himself into the throng, asked, "People, what do you want?" "We want to go as a garrison to the cloister to defend the Mother of God," cried men, shaking their flails, forks, and other rustic weapons. "We wish to look for the last time on the Most Holy Lady," groaned women. The prior went on a high rock and said, "The gates of hell will not prevail against the might of heaven. Calm yourselves and receive consolation into your hearts. The foot of a heretic will not enter these holy walls. Neither Lutherans nor Calvinists will celebrate their superstitious incantations in this retreat of worship and faith. I know not in truth whether the insolent enemy will come hither, but I know this, that if he does come, he will be forced to retreat in shame and disgrace, for a superior power will crush him. His malice will be broken, his power rubbed out, and his fortune will fail. Take consolation to your hearts. You are not looking for the last time on our patroness. You will see her in still greater glory, and you will see new miracles. Take consolation, dry your tears, and strengthen yourselves in faith. For I tell you, and it is not I who speak, but the Spirit of God speaks through me, that the Swede will not enter these walls. Grace will flow hence, and darkness will not put out the light, just as the night which is now coming will not hinder God's sun from rising to morrow." It was just sunset. Dark shade had covered already the region about, but the church was gleaming red in the last rays of the sun. Seeing this, the people knelt round the walls, and consolation flowed into their hearts at once. Meanwhile the Angelus was sounded on the towers, and Kordetski began to sing "The Angel of the Lord," and after him whole crowds sang. The nobles and the soldiers standing on the walls joined their voices; the bells greater and smaller pealed in accompaniment, and it seemed that the whole mountain was singing and sounding like a gigantic organ to the four points of the earth. They sang till late. The prior blessed the departing on their way, and said, "Those men who have served in war, who know how to wield weapons, and who feel courage in their hearts, may come in the morning to the cloister." "I have served, I was in the infantry, I will come," cried numerous voices. And the throngs separated slowly. The night fell calmly. All woke next morning with a joyous cry, "The Swede is not here." Still all day workmen were bringing supplies which had been called for. An order went out also to those who had shops at the eastern walls of the cloister to bring their goods to the cloister, and in the cloister itself work did not cease on the walls. Secured especially were the so-called passages, that is, small openings in the walls which were not gates, but which might serve in making sallies. Pan Zamoyski gave orders to bring beams, bricks, and dung, so that at a given moment they could be easily closed from within. All day, too, wagons were coming in with supplies and provisions. There came also some noble families who were alarmed by the news of the impending attack of the enemy. About midday the men who had been sent out the preceding day to gather tidings came back, but no one had seen the Swedes nor even heard of them, except those who were stationed near Kjepitsi. Still preparations were not abandoned in the cloister. By order of the prior, those of the townspeople and peasantry came who had formerly served in the infantry and who were accustomed to service. They were assigned to the command of Pan Mosinski, who was defending the northeastern bastion. Pan Zamoyski was occupied during the day either in disposing the men in their places, instructing each one what to do, or holding counsel with the fathers in the refectory. Kmita with joy in his heart looked at the military preparations, at the soldiers as they were mustered, at the cannon, at the stacks of muskets, spears, and hooks. That was his special element. In the midst of those terrible implements, in the midst of the urgent preparations and military feverishness, it was light, pleasant, and joyous for him. It was the easier and more joyous because he had made a general confession of his whole life, and beyond his own expectations had received absolution, for the prior took into account his intention, his sincere desire to reform, and this too, that he had already entered on the road. So Pan Andrei had freed himself from the burdens under which he was almost falling. Heavy penances had been imposed on him, and every day his back was bleeding under Soroka's braided lash. He was enjoined to practice obedience, and that was a penance still more difficult, for he had not obedience in his heart. On the contrary, he had pride and boastfulness. Finally he was commanded to strengthen his reformation by virtuous deeds. But that was the easiest, he desired and asked for nothing more. His whole soul was tearing forth toward exploits. For by exploits he understood war and killing the Swedes from morning till evening without rest and without mercy. And just then, what a noble road was opening to him! To kill Swedes, not only in defence of the country, not only in defence of the king to whom he had sworn loyalty, but in defence of the Queen of the Angels. That was a happiness beyond his merit. Whither had those times gone when he was standing as it were on the parting of the roads, asking himself whither he should go? Where are those times in which he knew not what to begin, in which he was always meeting doubt, and in which he had begun to lose hope? And those men, those white monks and that handful of peasants and nobles were preparing for serious defence, for a life and death struggle. That was the one spot of such character in the Commonwealth, and Pan Andrei had come just to that spot, as if led by some fortunate star. And he believed sacredly in victory, though the whole power of Sweden were to encircle those walls; hence in his heart he had prayer, joy, and gratitude. In this frame of mind he walked along the walls, and with a bright face examined, inspected, and saw that good was taking place. With the eye of experience, he saw at once from the preparations that they were made by men of experience, who would be able to show themselves when it came to the test. He wondered at the calmness of the prior, for whom he had conceived a deep reverence. He was astounded at the prudence of Zamoyski, and even of Pan Charnyetski. Though he was displeased at him, he did not show a wry face. But that knight looked on Pan Andrei harshly, and meeting him on the wall the day after the return of the messengers, he said, "No Swedes are to be seen, and if they do not come, the dogs will eat your reputation." "If any harm should result from their coming to this holy place, then let the dogs eat my reputation." "You would rather not smell their powder. We know knights who have boots lined with hare's skin." Kmita dropped his eyes like a young girl. "You might rather let disputes rest," said he. "In what have I offended you? I have forgotten your offences against me. Do you forget mine against you?" "You called me a whipper snapper," said Charnyetski sharply. "I should like to know who you are. In what are the Babiniches better than the Charnyetskis? Are they a senatorial family too?" "My worthy sir," said Kmita, with a pleasant face, "if it were not for the obedience which was imposed on me in confession, if it were not for those blows which are given me every day on my back for my follies of past time, I would speak to you differently. But I am afraid of relapsing into previous offences. As to whether the Babiniches or the Charnyetskis are better, that will appear when the Swedes come." "And what kind of office do you think of getting? Do you suppose that they will make you one of the commanders?" Kmita grew serious. "You accused me of seeking profit. Now you speak of office. Know that I have not come here for honor. I might have received higher honor elsewhere. I will remain a simple soldier, even under your command." "Why? For what reason?" "Because you do me injustice and are ready to torment me." "Huh! There is no reason for that. It is very beautiful of you to be willing to remain a simple soldier when it is clear that you have wonderful daring and obedience does not come easy. Would you like to fight?" "That will appear with the Swedes, as I have said." "But if the Swedes do not come?" "Then do you know what? We will go to look for them," said Kmita. "That pleases me," cried Charnyetski. "We could assemble a nice party. Silesia is not far from this place, and at once soldiers could be collected. Officers like my uncle have promised, but nothing has been said about soldiers. A great number of them might be had at the first call." "And this would give a saving example to others," cried Kmita, with warmth. "I have a handful of men too; you ought to see them at work." "Good, good!" said Charnyetski. "As God is dear to me, let me have your face." "And give yours," said Kmita. And without long thinking they rushed into each other's arms. Just then the prior was passing, and seeing what had happened, he began to bless both. They told at once of what they had been talking. The prior merely smiled quietly and went on, saying to himself, "Health is returning to the sick." Toward evening preparations were finished, and the fortress was entirely ready for defence. Nothing was wanting, neither supplies, nor powder, nor guns, only walls sufficiently strong and a more numerous garrison. Chenstohova, or rather Yasna Gora, though strengthened by nature and art, was counted among the smallest and weakest fortresses of the Commonwealth. But as to the garrison, as many people might have been had for the summoning as any one wished; but the prior purposely did not overburden the walls with men, so that supplies might hold out for a long time. Still there were those, especially among the German gunners, who were convinced that Chenstohova could not defend itself. Fools! They thought it had no defence, but its walls and its weapons they knew not what hearts filled with faith are. The prior then fearing lest they might spread doubt among the people, dismissed them, save one who was esteemed a master in his art. That same day old Kyemlich and his sons came to Kmita with a request to be freed from service. Anger carried away Pan Andrei. "Dogs!" cried he, "you are ready to resign such a service and will not defend the most holy lady? Well, let it be so. You have had pay for your horses, you will receive the rest for your services soon." Here he took a purse from a casket and threw it on the floor to them. "Here are your wages. You choose to seek plunder on that side of the walls, to be robbers instead of defenders of Mary. Out of my sight, you are not worthy to be here. You are not worthy of Christian society. You are not worthy to die such a death as awaits you in this place. Out, out!" "We are not worthy," answered the old man, spreading his hands and bending his head. "We are not worthy to have our dull eyes look on the splendors of Yasna Gora, fortress of heaven, morning star, refuge of sinners. We are not worthy, not worthy." Here he bent so low that he bent double, and at the same time with his thin, greedy hands, grown lean, seized the purse lying on the floor. "But outside the walls," said he, "we shall not cease to serve your grace. In sudden need we will let you know everything. We will go where 'tis needful, we will do what is needful. Your grace will have ready servants outside the walls." "Be off," repeated Pan Andrei. They went out bowing, for fear was choking them, and they were happy that the affair had ended thus. Toward evening they were no longer in the fortress. A dark and rainy night followed. It was November 8th, and early winter was approaching, and together with waves of rain the first flakes of wet snow were flying to the ground. Silence was broken only by the prolonged voices of guards calling from bastion to bastion, "Hold watch!" and in the darkness slipped past here and there the white habit of the prior Kordetski. Kmita slept not. He was on the walls with Charnyetski, with whom he spoke of his past campaigns. Kmita narrated the course of the war with Hovanski, evidently not mentioning the part in which he had taken it in himself, and Charnyetski talked of the skirmishes with the Swedes at Pjedbor, at Jarnovski, and in the environs of Cracow, of which he boasted somewhat, and said, "What was possible was done. You see, for every Swede whom I stretched out I made a knot in my sword sash. I have 6 knots, and God grant me more. For this reason I wear the sword higher toward my shoulder. Soon the sash will be useless, but I'll not take out the knots. In every knot I will have a turquoise set. After the war I will hang up the sash as a votive offering. And have you one Swede on your conscience?" "No," answered Kmita, with shame. "Not far from Sohachev I scattered a band, but they were robbers." "But you might make a great score of Northerners." "I might do that." "With the Swedes it is harder, for rarely is there one of them who is not a wizard. They learned from the Finns how to use the black ones, and each Swede has 2 or 3 devils in his service, and there are some who have 7. These guard them terribly in time of battle. But if they come hither, the devils will help them in no way, for the power of devils can do nothing in a circle where the tower on Yasna Gora is visible. Have you heard of this?" Kmita made no answer; he turned his head to listen attentively. "They are coming!" said he, suddenly. "Who, in God's name? What do you say?" "I hear cavalry." "That is only wind, and the beating of rain." "By the wounds of Christ, that is not the wind, but horses! I have a wonderfully sharp ear. A multitude of cavalry are marching, and are near already, but the wind drowns the noise. The time has come, the time has come!" The voice of Kmita roused the stiffened guard, dozing near at hand; but it had not yet ceased when below in the darkness was heard the piercing blare of trumpets, and they began to sound, prolonged, complaining, terrible. All sprang up from slumber in amazement, in fright, and asked one another, "Are not those the trumpets sounding to judgment in this gloomy night?" Then the monks, the soldiers, the nobles began to come out on the square. The bell ringers rushed to the bells, and soon they were all heard, the great, the smaller, and the small bells, as if for a fire, mingling their groans with the sounds of the trumpets which had not ceased to play. Lighted matches were thrown into pitch barrels, prepared of purpose and tied with chains; then they were drawn upward with cranks. Red light streamed over the base of the cliff, and then the people on Yasna Gora saw before them a party of mounted trumpeters, those standing nearest with trumpets at their mouths, behind them long and deep ranks of mounted men with unfurled flags. The trumpeters played some time yet, as if they wished with those brazen sounds to express the whole power of the Swedes, and to terrify the monks altogether. At last they were silent; one of them separated from the rank, and waving a white kerchief approached the gate. "In the name of his royal grace," cried the trumpeter, "the most serene King of the Swedes, Goths, and Vandals, Grand Prince of Finland, Esthonia, Karelia, Stettin, Pomerania, and the Kashubes, Prince of Rugen, Lord of Ingria, Wismark, and Bavaria, Count of the Rhenish Palatinate, open the gates." "Admit him," said Kordetski. They opened, but only a door in the gate. The horseman hesitated for a time; at last he came down from his horse, entered within the circle of the walls, and seeing a crowd of white habits, he asked, Who among you is the superior?" "I am," answered Kordetski. The horseman gave him a letter with seals, and said, "Count Veyhard will wait for an answer at St. Barbara's." The prior summoned at once the monks and nobles to the council chamber to deliberate. On the way Pan Charnyetski said to Kmita, "Come, you also." "I will go, but only through curiosity," answered Pan Andrei, "for I have no work there. Henceforward I will not serve the Most Holy Lady with my mouth." When they had entered the council chamber, the prior broke the seal and read as follows: "It is not a secret to you, worthy fathers, what a favorable mind and with what heart I have always looked on this holy place and your congregation; also how constantly I have surrounded you with my care and heaped benefits on you. Therefore I desire that you remain in the conviction that neither my inclination nor good wishes toward you have ceased in the present juncture. Not as an enemy, but as a friend do I come this day. Put your cloister under my protection without fear, as the time and present circumstances demand. In this way you will find the calm which you desire as well as safety. I promise you solemnly that the sacredness of the place will be inviolate, your property will not be destroyed. I will bear all expenses myself, and in fact add to your means. Consider also carefully how much you will profit if, satisfying me, you confide me to your cloister. Remember my advice, lest a greater misfortune reach you from the terrible General Miller, whose orders will be the more severe because he is a heretic and an enemy of the true faith. When he comes, you must yield to necessity and carry out his commands, and you will raise useless complaints with pain in your souls and your bodies, because you disregarded my mild counsel." The memory of recent benefactions of Count Veyhard touched the monks greatly. There were some who had confidence in his good will, and wished to see in his counsel the avoidance of future defeats and misfortunes. But no one raised a voice, waiting for what Kordetski would say. He was silent for a while, but his lips were moving in prayer. Then he said, "Would a true friend draw near in the night time and terrify with such a dreadful voice of trumpets and crooked horns the sleeping servants of God? Would he come at the head of those armed thousands who are now standing under these walls? Why did he not come with 4 or 9 others, if he hoped for the reception given a welcome benefactor? What do those stern legions mean, if not a threat in case we refuse to yield up this cloister? Listen, remember too, dearest brothers, that this enemy has never kept word nor oath nor safeguard. We too have that of the King of Sweden sent us spontaneously, in which is an express promise that the cloister shall remain free of occupation. And why are they standing now under its walls, trumpeting their own lie with fearful brazen sound? My dear brothers, let each man raise his heart to heaven, so that the Holy Ghost may enlighten it, and then let us consider what conscience dictates to each one touching the good of this holy retreat." Silence followed, then Kmita's voice rose. "I heard in Krushyn Lisola ask him, 'Will you shake up their treasury for the monks?' To which the count, who now stands under these walls, answered, 'The Mother of God will not ask for the thalers in the priors' chests.' Today this same Count Veyhard writes to you, reverend fathers, that he will bear all expenses himself, and besides add to your means. Consider his sincerity." To this Father Myelko, one of the oldest in the assembly, and besides a former soldier, answered, "We live in poverty, and burn these torches before the altar of the Most Holy Lady in her praise. But though we were to take them from the altar so as to purchase immunity for this holy place, where is our guarantee that the Swedes would respect the immunity, that they with sacrilegious hands would not remove offerings, sacred vestments, church furniture? Is it possible to trust liars?" "Without the provincial to whom we owe obedience, we can do nothing," said Father Dobrosh. "War is not our affair," added Father Tomitski. "Let us listen to what these knights will say who have taken refuge under the wings of the Mother of God in this cloister." All eyes were now turned to Pan Zamoyski, the oldest in years, the highest in dignity and office. He rose and spoke in the following words: "It is a question here of your fate, reverend fathers. Compare then the strength of the enemy with the resistance which you can place against him according to your force and will. What counsel can we, guests here, impart to you? But, reverend fathers, since you ask us what is to be done, I will answer. Unless the inevitable forces us, let the thought of surrender be far away, for it is a shameful and an unworthy act to purchase with vile submission an uncertain peace from a faithless enemy. We have taken refuge here of our own will with our wives and children, surrendering ourselves to the guardianship of the Most Holy Lady. We have determined with unswerving faith to live with you, and, if God shall so desire, to die with you. It is indeed better for us thus than to accept a shameful captivity or behold an affront to a holy place. Of a certainty, that Mother of the Most High God, who has inspired our breasts with a desire of defending her against godless and sacrilegious heretics, will second the pious endeavors of her servants and support the cause of our own defence." At this point Pan Zamoyski ceased speaking; all paid attention to his words, strengthening themselves with the meaning of them, and Kmita, without forethought, as was his wont, sprang forward and pressed the hand of the old man to his lips. The spectators were edified by this sight, and each one saw a good presage in that youthful ardor, and a desire to defend the cloister increased and seized all hearts. Meanwhile a new presage was given. Outside the window of the refectory was heard unexpectedly the trembling and aged voice of Constantia, the old beggar woman of the church, singing a pious hymn. "In vain dost thou threaten me, O savage Hussite! In vain dost thou summon devil's horns to thy aid. In vain dost thou burn, sparing no blood, for thou'lt not subdue me. Though thousands of pagans were now rushing hither, though armies were flying against me on dragons, neither sword, flame, nor men will avail thee, for I shall be victor." "Here," said Kordetski, "is a presage which God sends through the lips of that old beggar woman. Let us defend ourselves, brothers, for in truth besieged people have never yet had such aids as will come to us." "We will give our lives willingly," said Charnyetski. "We will not trust faith breakers. We will not trust heretics, nor those among Catholics who have accepted the service of the evil spirit," shouted others, who did not wish to let those speak who oppressed. It was decided to send 2 priests to Count Veyhard, with information that the gates would remain closed, and the besieged would defend themselves, to which action the safeguard of the king gave them a right. But in their own way the envoys were to beg the count humbly to desist from his design, or at least to defer it for a time until the monks could ask permission of Father Teofil Bronyevski, provincial of the order, who was then in Silesia. The envoys, Father Benedict Yarachevski and Martseli Tomitski, passed out through the gate. The others awaited in the refectory their return with throbbing hearts, for terror had seized those monks, unused to war, when the hour had struck and the moment had come in which they were forced to choose between duty and the anger and vengeance of the enemy. But half an hour had barely elapsed when the 2 fathers appeared before the council. Their heads were hanging over their breasts, on their faces were pallor and grief. In silence they gave Kordetski a letter from Count Veyhard, which he took from their hands and read aloud. There were 8 points of capitulation under which the count summoned the monks to surrender the cloister. When he had finished reading, the prior looked long in the faces of those assembled. At last he said with a solemn voice, "In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, in the name of the most pure and most holy Mother of God, to the walls, beloved brethren." To the walls, was the answer of all. A little later a bright flame lighted the base of the cloister. Count Veyhard had given orders to burn the buildings connected with the church of Saint Barbara. The fire seizing the old houses grew with each moment. Soon pillars of red smoke reared themselves toward the sky. In the midst of these, fiery, sparkling tongues were gleaming. Finally one conflagration was spreading in clouds. By the gleam of the fire, divisions of mounted soldiers could be seen passing quickly from place to place. The usual license of soldiers had begun. The horsemen drove out from the stables cattle, which, running with fright, filled the air with plaintive bellowing. Sheep, gathered in groups, pushed at random toward the fire. Many of the defenders saw for the first time the bloody face of war, and their hearts grew benumbed with terror at the sight of people driven by soldiers and slashed with sabres, at the sight of women dragged by the hair through the marketplace. And by the bloody gleams of the fire all this was as visible as on the palm of the hand. Shouts and even words reached the ears of the besieged perfectly. Since the cannon of the cloister had not answered yet, horsemen sprang from their horses and approached the foot of the mountain itself, shaking their swords and muskets. Every moment some sturdy fellow, dressed in a yellow cavalry jacket, putting his hands around his mouth, jeered and threatened the besieged, who listened patiently, standing at their guns with lighted matches. Kmita was at the side of Charnyetski, just in front of the church, and saw everything clearly. On his cheeks a deep flush came out. His eyes were like two torches, and in his hand he held an excellent bow, which he had received as an inheritance from his father, who had captured it from the celebrated Aga at Hotsim. He heard the threats and invectives, and finally when a gigantic horseman had come under the cliff and was making an uproar, he turned to Charnyetski. "As God is true, he is blasphemy against the Most Holy Lady. I understand German. He blasphemes dreadfully. I cannot endure it." And he lowered the bow, but Charnyetski touched him with his hand. "God will punish him for his blasphemy," said he, "but Kordetski has not permitted us to shoot first. Let them begin." He had barely spoken when the horseman raised his musket to his face, a shot thundered, and the ball, without reaching the walls, was lost somewhere among the crannies of the place. "We are free now!" cried Kmita. "Yes," answered Charnyetski. Kmita, as a true man of war, became calm in a moment. The horseman, shading his eyes with his hands, looked after the ball. Kmita drew the bow, ran his finger along the string till it twittered like a swallow, then he bent carefully and cried, "A corpse! A corpse!" At the same moment was heard the whirring whistle of the terrible arrow. The horseman dropped his musket, raised both hands on high, threw up his head, and fell on his back. He struggled for a while like a fish snatched from water, and dug the earth with his feet; but soon he stretched himself and remained without motion. "That is one," said Kmita. "Tie it in your sword sash," answered Charnyetski. "A bell rope would not be long enough, if God will permit," cried Pan Andrei. A second horseman rushed to the dead man, wishing to see what had happened to him, or perhaps to take his purse, but the arrow whistled again, and the second fell on the breast of the first. Meanwhile the field pieces which Count Veyhard had brought with him opened fire. He could not storm the fortress with them, neither could he think of capturing it, having only cavalry, but he gave command to open fire to terrify the priests. Still a beginning was made. Kordetski appeared at the side of Charnyetski, and with him came Father Dobrosh, who managed the cloister artillery in time of peace, and on holidays fired salutes; therefore he passed as an excellent gunner among the monks. The prior blessed the cannon and pointed them out to the priest, who rolled up his sleeves and began to aim at a point in a half circle between two buildings, where a number of horsemen were raging, and among them an officer with a rapier in his hand. The priest aimed long, for his reputation was at stake. At last he took the match and touched the priming. Thunder shook the air and smoke covered the view, but after a while the wind bore it aside. In the space between the buildings there was not a single horseman left. A number were lying with their horses on the ground, the others had fled. The monks on the walls began to sing. The crash of buildings falling around St. Barbara's church accompanied the songs. It grew darker, but vast swarms of sparks sent upward by the fall of timbers pierced the air. Trumpets were sounded again in the ranks of Count Veyhard's horsemen, but the sound from them receded. The fire was burning to the end. Darkness enveloped the foot of Yasna Gora. Here and there was heard the neighing of horses, but ever farther, ever weaker, the count was withdrawing to Kjepitsi. Kordetski knelt on the walls. "Mary, mother of the one God," said he, with a powerful voice, "bring it to pass that he whose attack comes after this man will retreat in like manner, with shame and vain anger in his soul." While he prayed thus the clouds broke suddenly above his head, and the bright light of the moon whitened the towers, the walls, the kneeling prior, and the burned ruins of buildings at St. Barbara. Chapter 41